You know, it's funny how people who love the hardest often end up with the ones who run the fastest. The super empath, the person who feels deeply, gives freely, and loves courageously, often finds themselves chasing the avoidant, the one who withdraws when things get real. It's a dance between closeness and distance, hope and heartbreak. But here's the truth. The avoidant isn't running from you, they're running from themselves, from the fear of being seen too closely, from the terror of needing someone and losing control. And ironically, it's your empathy, your warmth, your understanding that exposes those fears. You start to think, if I just love harder, maybe they'll stay. But that's not love, that's rescue. And every time you try to rescue someone who's running, you end up abandoning yourself. The super empath's real power doesn't come from how much they can feel for others, it comes from how deeply they can honor their own needs. When you finally stop chasing, stop over-explaining, stop proving your worth, something shifts. The avoidant starts to feel the absence of your energy because for the first time, they're no longer being emotionally babysat. You break the cycle not by changing them, but by returning home to yourself. See, the moment you say, I deserve consistency, I deserve safety, I deserve to be met where I stand, you reclaim your power. And that power is magnetic. It draws in people who can meet you emotionally instead of running from connection. The irony, when you stop trying to heal the avoidant, you actually teach them what real connection looks like. You model self-respect. You model boundaries. You model love that doesn't come at the cost of self-sacrifice. So to every super empath who's ever felt like they are too much, too emotional, too giving, no, you're not too much. You've just been giving it to the wrong people. The right person won't need you to shrink to make them feel safe. They'll expand with you, because the one who truly deserves your empathy will never make you feel like loving them is a battle. You don't break the avoidance cycle by fixing them. You break it by loving yourself so deeply that you no longer chase people who can't love you back. And when that happens, the dance ends, not with revenge, not with pain, but with peace. Empathy is one of the most beautiful human qualities. It allows us to connect, understand, and feel what others feel. But when empathy goes unchecked, when it has no boundaries, it can quietly turn into self-abandonment. The super empath, by nature, feels everything so deeply that they often mistake understanding someone's pain for needing to heal it. They don't just see the wounds in others, they want to be the cure. And that's where the cycle begins, not with malice or weakness, but with love that has forgotten to include itself. When a super empath meets an avoidant partner, their instinct is to reach out, to fill the emotional space that feels empty. They sense the avoidant's distance and interpret it as a call for more patience, more understanding, more effort. But empathy without boundaries becomes a one-way flow of energy. The empath pours in more attention, more reassurance, more care, while the avoidant, overwhelmed by intimacy, withdraws even further. It's a painful paradox. The more love the empath gives, the more the avoidant retreats. In that space of withdrawal, the empath often begins to internalize the distance. They start asking themselves, am I too much? Did I say something wrong? Maybe if I just give them a little more space, they'll come back. What they don't realize is that they're slowly teaching themselves to tolerate emotional starvation. They're rewriting the story of love into one where silence means safety, distance means devotion, and effort equals worthiness. But real connection cannot grow in a place where one person is constantly shrinking to make the other comfortable. True empathy is powerful, but it's not meant to erase your own needs. When empathy becomes your identity, you stop checking in with yourself. You start measuring your value by how much pain you can absorb or how much chaos you can calm. You forget that empathy without balance is not compassion, it's self-neglect disguised as kindness. It's giving and giving until there's nothing left to give, and then wondering why you feel unseen and unappreciated. Boundaries are not walls, they are the framework that protects your emotional core. For a super empath, setting boundaries can feel unnatural, even cruel at first. Saying asterisk no asterisk or pulling back from someone's pain might trigger guilt, because your instinct says love means staying no matter what. But boundaries are the language of self-respect. They say, asterisk, I can care about you deeply without losing myself in the process. Asterisk, and paradoxically, that's what makes empathy even more powerful when it comes from a place of strength instead of sacrifice. When you begin to practice empathy with boundaries, something shifts inside you. You stop reacting to every emotional pull. You stop trying to rescue people from feelings they're not ready to face. You start realizing that being kind to others doesn't mean abandoning your own peace. It means showing compassion while holding your ground, offering love without erasing your limits. Because empathy without boundaries may connect you to others, but empathy with boundaries connects you to yourself. And that connection is the foundation of every healthy, lasting relationship. When someone with an avoidant attachment style pulls away, it can feel personal, like rejection, like disinterest, like a reflection of your worth. But the truth is, the avoidant isn't running from you. They're running from intimacy itself. They fear what closeness represents: vulnerability, dependence, and the possibility of being hurt. To them, love feels like a loss of control. So when things get real, when emotional depth starts to surface, their instinct is to retreat. It's not about you being too much, it's about them feeling too exposed. The super empath, however, takes this withdrawal to heart. Because they're naturally tuned into others' emotions, they sense the shift immediately: the delayed replies, the emotional distance, the subtle coldness, and instead of stepping back, they lean in. They start trying to bridge the gap, to fix whatever went wrong, to bring them back. The empath thinks that with just enough care, patience, or love, the avoidant will feel safe again. But that very effort often deepens the avoidant's fear, confirming their internal story that intimacy equals pressure. Avoidants learned early on that closeness can be unsafe. Maybe they were criticized for needing affection, or they grew up around emotional inconsistency that made vulnerability feel dangerous. So they learned to survive by staying self-contained, by depending only on themselves. When a relationship begins to mirror the intensity of the connection they once feared, the old defense mechanisms kick in. Distance becomes their shield, independence becomes their armor. And the super empath's warmth, as beautiful as it is, feels like a flood to someone who's spent a lifetime keeping their emotions dammed up. For the empath, this feels confusing. You give love, you offer understanding, you show consistency, and still they pull away. You start to believe that if you were more patient, more perfect, or more accommodating, they'd finally stay. But their withdrawal isn't about your inadequacy, it's about their conditioning. The closer they feel, the more their subconscious warns them, asterisk, you're in danger of losing yourself. Asterisk, so they create space to breathe, to feel in control again. And that space is often misread as rejection. The lesson for the super empath is to stop personalizing the avoidance fear. You cannot love someone into safety if they've never learned to feel safe within themselves. The avoidance emotional distance is not a punishment, it's protection. And while empathy can help you understand their struggle, it cannot substitute their healing. You can't fight someone's internal wiring with more love, because love is what triggered their fear in the first place. Instead of chasing, the empath must observe. Instead of rescuing, they must respect the distance. The real act of love in that moment is to let the avoidant sit with their discomfort without trying to fix it. When you stop internalizing their avoidance as rejection, you stop the emotional roller coaster. You realize that their behavior is not proof that you're unlovable, it's evidence that they're not ready to receive the kind of love you offer. Their running doesn't define your value, it defines their readiness. And that awareness frees you from the endless cycle of overgiving, because you finally understand their fear of closeness was never about you. There comes a point in every empath's life where exhaustion replaces hope when you've tried every possible way to prove your love, to explain your intentions, to create safety for someone who keeps pulling away. You start realizing that no matter how much effort you give, it's never enough to change the dynamic. That's the moment when real transformation begins, because breaking the avoidance cycle isn't about convincing the other person to stay. It's about reclaiming your power. The pattern only continues when you make their approval the source of your self-worth. Once you stop doing that, the entire dynamic starts to collapse. When you're caught in the avoidance cycle, everything feels like a chase. Their silence becomes a puzzle to solve. Their distance becomes an invitation to try harder. You start to mistake anxiety for chemistry and inconsistency for depth. The emotional highs and lows create a bond that feels addictive, but it's not love, it's survival. The empath's need to connect meets the avoidance need to escape, and together they form a loop that feeds on imbalance. You stay hopeful, thinking that one more act of love will finally make them feel safe enough to stay. But in doing so, you give away your own sense of peace. Reclaiming your power begins with remembering that your emotional energy is sacred. You are not meant to chase someone who is hiding from intimacy. You are not meant to explain your worth to someone who doesn't have the capacity to receive it. When you stop chasing, you don't lose love, you lose chaos. You create the space for something healthier to grow, and in that stillness you begin to see yourself clearly again. You start asking, why am I fighting so hard for someone who's not fighting for me? That question isn't bitterness, it's awakening. Power in this context doesn't mean control. It means self-ownership, the ability to stand in your truth without needing to convince anyone else of it. When you reclaim your power, you stop reacting to their every move. You no longer spiral when they go silent. You no longer beg for reassurance. Instead, you ground yourself in your own emotional stability. You realize that peace is not something they can give you. It's something you choose. And that choice begins with the decision to stop participating in the cycle. Breaking the avoidance cycle doesn't require anger or revenge. It simply requires detachment, the quiet courage to walk away from dynamics that drain you. You start seeing that the person who keeps avoiding connection is actually showing you your own boundaries. Every time they withdraw, the universe is asking, will you chase or will you choose yourself? And the moment you choose yourself, you break the spell. That's the paradox of power. When you no longer need someone to change in order to feel okay, you become free. You stop being the emotional caretaker and start being the emotional authority of your own life. You see that love isn't meant to hurt, confuse, or deplete you. It's meant to flow in both directions, and if it doesn't, it's not your job to fix it. Reclaiming your power is remembering that you were never powerless, you just forgot where your energy truly belongs. Healing isn't about changing someone else's behavior. It's about changing the way you show up in the relationship. When you've spent your life being the emotional anchor for others, it's natural to think that love means saving people from themselves. The super empath often believes that if they can just love deeply enough, understand thoroughly enough, or stay patient long enough, they can heal the avoidant. But true healing doesn't come from rescue, it comes from example. You don't heal someone by pulling them closer. You heal by showing them what it looks like to love without losing yourself. When you hold your boundaries with grace, you quietly teach others what real connection feels like. You show them that love doesn't mean control or dependence. It means mutual respect and safety. The avoidant, who has spent a lifetime fearing intimacy, learns through your calm detachment that closeness doesn't have to be suffocating. When you stop over-explaining, stop chasing, and simply stand in your truth, you create a model of emotional stability that the avoidant has never known. They may not change immediately or ever, but your example plants a seed. It shows that love can exist without chaos, and that's something their nervous system has likely never experienced. The empath's natural gift is compassion, but compassion without boundaries becomes enabling. You end up teaching others that they can withdraw, avoid accountability, or neglect emotional connection, and you'll still be there waiting. That's not love, that's tolerance of imbalance. When you decide to hold your boundary and not overextend, you're not being cold or unkind, you're being healthy. You're saying, asterisk, I can care about your struggle, but I won't abandon myself to fix it. Asterisk, that statement alone carries more healing energy than 1,000 apologies or reassurances ever could. What most people don't realize is that your boundaries are a mirror. They reflect back to others how to treat you, but they also reflect back to you how much you've grown. When you model self-respect, you give permission for others to either rise to that level or fall away. Both outcomes serve your growth. The avoidant, faced with your calm refusal to play the old game, will either be inspired to examine their behavior or retreat further into their comfort zone. Either way, you've done your part not by fixing them, but by holding space for them to grow if they choose to. The power of modeling is that it doesn't demand, it doesn't chase or beg. It simply exists as an example of what healthy love looks like. The empath who used to absorb everyone's pain begins to realize that true love doesn't require self-erasure. It's not your job to make others emotionally available. It's your job to remain emotionally grounded. When you live by that truth, you become a silent teacher not through lectures or persuasion, but through energy. Your peace becomes contagious. Your steadiness becomes magnetic. And in that steadiness, you heal not just yourself, but the dynamic that once kept you trapped. Because the greatest way to teach love is to embody it without losing yourself in the process. There comes a moment in every empath's journey when they finally realize that love shouldn't hurt this much. That giving shouldn't feel like bleeding. That caring deeply shouldn't mean constantly proving your worth to someone who doesn't know how to receive it. The super empath's heart is enormous. It wants to nurture, to fix, to believe in the potential of others. But the truth is, love without self, love becomes self-sacrifice. And that's where the healing begins, when you finally decide that your peace matters more than your potential to save someone. Self-love is not a feeling. It's a decision you make every day. It's choosing to protect your energy, even when your heart wants to give more. It's recognizing that your time, your effort, and your affection are valuable resources, not open taps for anyone who asks. When you start practicing self-love, you begin to see clearly how much of your empathy was actually overextension. You realize that you've been trying to earn love instead of receiving it freely. You've been holding on to people who make you question your worth instead of reinforcing it. And when you wake up to that truth, everything changes, breaking the avoidant cycle through self. Love means no longer begging for connection from someone who fears it. You stop interpreting their silence as a challenge and start seeing it as clarity. You stop making excuses for inconsistency, and instead you honor your need for emotional safety. It's not about closing your heart, it's about opening it to yourself first. Because when you fill your own cup, you stop accepting half-empty offers from others. You stop tolerating relationships where you do all the emotional labor. You stop chasing potential and start valuing presence. The avoidant cycle thrives on imbalance. One person gives too much, the other gives too little. But when you love yourself, you step out of that imbalance entirely. You no longer play the role of healer or caretaker. You no longer need to be needed. Instead, you learn to be whole on your own, and that wholeness is what breaks the spell. Because the moment you no longer depend on someone's attention to feel complete, their avoidance loses its power over you. You see it for what it is: not rejection, not abandonment, but simply misalignment. Loving yourself deeply doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care without collapsing. You can still have compassion for someone's wounds without taking responsibility for them. You can still love without losing your center. That's the quiet confidence of a healed empath to know that love isn't about chasing or convincing, it's about choosing. Choosing peace over chaos, choosing boundaries over breadcrumbs, choosing alignment over attachment. When you truly love yourself, you stop fighting for relationships that drain you. You realize that closure isn't something they give you, it's something you decide. You forgive without reopening the door. You walk away without resentment because you understand that peace is the reward. The avoidant cycle ends not when they change, but when you decide that your love is too sacred to be wasted on someone who's afraid to hold it. And in that moment, you don't lose love, you find it, right where it's always been, within you. In the end, breaking the avoidant cycle isn't about changing anyone else, it's about coming home to yourself. It's realizing that your empathy is a gift, but it becomes power only when guided by self-love. When you stop chasing, start choosing yourself, and stand firm in your worth, you don't just end a painful pattern, you begin a new standard for love. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for reminding yourself that real connection starts where self-abandonment ends within you.